And thinking about the last time you did that several years ago, and I think there were 7 or 8.
Well, it's in a small enough group that fit around my kitchen island.
Yeah. And looking at what you have built in this community is amazing.
It was very special and very humbling. Okay, so just to recap, we're in the middle of chapter 29. And last class, we started speaking about, well, we spoke about why do people have faith in difficult times? Like, why is it that tough experiences sensitize us to holiness? Um, we spoke about that as an introduction and a segue into the fact that the Tanya uses this chapter to talk about people who are not spiritually sensitive. They might know the stuff, they might learn about it, they might read about it, but it's like, who cares? Like, they're not really getting inspired. They don't really care about their Judaism. We could classify it as they, people, but we all have such moments. We have times, whether it's seasons, whether it's days, whether it's years, times in our life where I just can't get myself to care. And the Tanya explains, where does this come from? How can you become insensitive to spirituality? And the Tanya says that it really comes from ego. It comes from it's an expression of the ego through an overindulgence in self, in me, in my needs, in my life, in my desires. My ego gets built up to a place where my ego feels big and proud and strong and doesn't need anything, doesn't feel like it needs anything. And at that point, it's not sensitive to spirituality. And the example that the Tanya quoted was from the Zohar. There's a tale in the Zohar where somebody declares in the heavenly court that what should you do if you have a log of wood that doesn't catch on fire? What do you need to do? You need to splinter it. We all know if you build a campfire and you have one of these big logs that's not catching, what do? I mean, everyone loves to get the little twigs and the little pine cones, or you start, breaking down and splintering the wood to actually allow the fire to catch on. And the Tanya says this example from the Zohar really teaches us something about our soul. If my heart if I am like a big log and I just can't get myself into the fire is there. The beauty is there, the Judaism is there, the knowledge is there, but it's all in my head and I can't get myself excited about it, then I am really being like this large log. And in order for the fire to catch, you might think, can't get myself inspired about Judaism. Maybe I need to study more. Maybe I need to go to more classes. Maybe I need to go to more events. And here the Tanya is saying that's not always the case. If you're exposed to a lot and you're learning a lot, but you just can't become sensitive to it, then the answer is splinter the wood. And what is splinter the wood? In our case, that's splinter the ego. We have to face our ego and break it down to allow the light to shine. And once you splinter that wood, the fire catches it and that's it. It's all in, it's included. But we do need to go through a process sometimes in order to just allow that sensitivity to even be there. There's a story told about a chassid who comes crying to his Rebbe, and he says, Rebbe, I have a major problem. Says, what's the problem? He said, I'm having lots of doubts in my faith. I don't know. I'm not sure what I believe, if I believe in God. And the Rebbe said, and it's bothering you? He said, yes, of course. It's really plaguing me. I can't sleep at night because it's so hard for me that I'm struggling with my faith in God. And the Rebbe said to him, but why does it bother you? If you're struggling with your faith in God, then it shouldn't bother you so much because maybe you actually don't believe. He's like, no, you don't understand. I'm a Jew and it bothers me that I don't believe. The Rebbe said, then you'll be fine. Keep studying, you'll be okay. The idea of the story is that, and the Tanya talks about this a lot, is at our core, A Jewish person at their core naturally believes, naturally is sensitive to spirituality, naturally wants to be connected. But we develop a certain shell, a certain hardened shell that comes from indulgence, that comes from ego, that sometimes makes us insensitive or not feel the sensitivity. So when this guy comes and says, I'm so bothered that I'm not sure if I believe, if you're bothered by it, you're in a good place. There are people who aren't bothered by it. It's if you're not bothered by it, that's when you have a problem. But if it bothers you, then great. You could be angry at God. You could be mad. You could be, you can approach faith from a whole lot of different places. But the one place you don't want to be is a place of, I don't care. Because if I'm in a place of, I don't care, then I've not lost, but I've covered up my spiritual sensitivity. And I become like that log of wood that just can't catch on fire. So that's kind of where we ended off last time. And we said the answer is, in this situation, you have to splinter the wood. How do you splinter your own wood? What do you do? And we started talking about this, but we'll continue and really finish it off this time. The Tanya tells us, so who's my ego? How do I talk to my ego? Well, I talk to my ego as I talk to myself. Most of us, the average person, identifies with their animal consciousness. Tanya talks a lot about that we have our animal consciousness and our divine consciousness, right? The animal soul and the godly soul. Again, the Tanya is written for the in-betweener, the average person. The average person, their natural instinct to how they relate to themselves, they relate to themselves as an earthly being. We have our animal instinct, which is the one that we most relate to. It doesn't mean that that's our core essence and that's our truest selves, but that's the one that we most relate to. It's only people of very high spiritual caliber, someone on the level of tzaddik, who has refined themselves to such a degree that they identify only with their spiritual self. But for most of us, we identify with our physical self. So in order to approach my ego, I need to approach myself. I need to talk to myself. And the Tanya actually gives a little deviation, but to kind of explain the idea that for most of us, we identify with the animalistic part of ourselves rather than the spiritual part of ourselves. The Tanya quotes a story about Hillel. Hillel the Elder, who was a very well-known righteous person in the times of the Talmud. And Hillel would often tell his students, at some point in middle of learning, he would say, I'm sorry, I have to go take a break. I have to do, I don't want to misquote it. I want to find it inside the Tanya because it's just written so beautifully. One second. Let's see if I can find it. Okay. Hillel used to tell his disciples, I'm going to do a favor to a lowly and poor creature. Students would be like, oh, what lowly and poor creature are you going to do a favor to? He was talking about feeding his body. Like he had to take an eating break. But he so identified with his spiritual self that eating was like a task I need to take care of to, take care of the physical side of me. But for most people, that's not the reality. That's not how God created us. We're created as, people who very much identify as earthly beings. So that being said, how do I, as an earthly being, confront my ego, confront this animal consciousness part of myself and splinter that ego and make space for the light, the holiness to come through? So some of you may remember this. We did this a few years ago and we spoke about this. And I think Sarah, Lorenz really helped us a lot. And Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is when someone is going through a mental health crisis and their loved ones, their people close to them recognize that there's a crisis, and the person themselves may or may not recognize what's going on. So sometimes there is an intervention that is arranged in order to kind of make that person aware of what's going on and that they have to take control of themselves. So let's just give a basic example. Somebody has become terribly addicted to, let's say, a certain substance. And the family is noticing that it's really taking a toll on them, and this person is really not themselves anymore and not performing their best, and they're really getting derailed. Now, the person themselves may or may not realize it. At some point, you know, the siblings, the close friends, the parents, they have a conversation. They're like, hey, we have to help him or her, right? So they arranged to have a planned out intervention meeting where they're all going to sit down with this person and say, hey, Sarah, or let's whatever her name, um, it's time to talk about what's going on, you know, and they will present the facts, put it all on the table, and have a little bit of a tough conversation with this person to kind of shake them awake and make them realize what's going on, and obviously show support and help them make a plan going forward. So that's what I'm reminded by what the Tanya says now. In order for me to confront my ego and kind of have a talk with myself, I need to see it as that kind of intervention. I look myself in the mirror and say, hey, Deanie, you know, you're really not as cool as you think you are. You know, here you think you got it all together. You think you have it all figured out. You study so much. You're doing all this good. Well, do you actually remember what you were doing last month at this time? Do you remember what you were doing last week? Do you remember that you know, this, that, you know, starting to like literally pull out charts and things. Because typically the ego that the Tanya is talking about is the way it expresses itself is a person feels like, I'm good. I don't need this like spiritual stuff. I don't need this holy Jewish stuff. Like, I'm in a good place. I have it figured out. I live my good life. I do all the good things. Don't get me involved in this Judaism too much. But when I could be real with myself and say, hey, wait a second, you actually don't have it all together. Don't you realize that there's this element of your life and that element of your life that aren't really all that glamorous? Maybe you do need to look to, you know, work on yourself. Maybe I'm pulling out. Now, obviously, it's different for each person, and it's a conversation that we have with ourselves. But I may pull out things that are happening in my life right now. I may pull out old things that kind of got over, but didn't really get over. I'm going to pull out something, anything, to really remind myself that actually I'm acting like one of these thick logs, and I might need a little bit of splintering to allow the fire to catch and to allow the light to shine through. And that, the Tanya says, that's the equivalent of splintering the wood. And when I do that, now it Sarah, I'm going to take your question in a minute, but I know someone brought it up last time that said, you know, sometimes God does things to you that shake you up like that, right? Like we said, when someone goes through a crisis and suddenly they're like, oh my goodness, like I need to reach out to faith. I need to reach out to spirituality. I need to reach out to Judaism. That's kind of like God splintering your wood for you. When you splinter your own wood, it's a much gentler process. It's really just like me looking in the mirror and just giving myself a little awakening so that God doesn't have to shake me awake. I can shake myself awake just enough to let the fire catch. Yes, Sarah. Sorry to keep you waiting so
Yeah.
long.
No, 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 not a problem at all. Yeah, I like my own analogy. I'm not remembering so much that I said that, but yeah, it sounds like something I would absolutely say, to develop, your insight. No, this year I'm a little bit different focused in terms of Rosh Hashanah specifically, because I'm thinking about some of these concepts like on purpose, like wanting to incorporate some of these concepts. And one of the things that I'm trying to figure out is, okay, so we have a shofar blowing, and it's a whole lot for me. I know I'm taught there's 17 billion different things that I could be thinking about. And I personally, I maybe it's too many options. I don't know, but I find myself overwhelmed with what I'm supposed to be thinking about during the shofar blowing, to the point where I find myself almost apathetic. Like, okay, cool, like shofar blowing. All right, now what? Right. And I know I'm not supposed to. Even now, like in Elul, like, okay, big deal. Like, yay, cool, we're doing the thing. But I don't find it like this inspiring, like, wow, look at this thing that's gonna happen. I don't find myself in that position yet. But again, this is a sense that I'm not necessarily using all the time, your sense of hearing, right? We're an action based, but this is in a way
Right.
passive, if you hear what I'm saying, right? So it's a
That's
little
so
different.
interesting. It's so interesting that you say that, because I actually found it, and it's nice to hear different perspectives. I typically find that shofar blowing is one of those things that pierces through even the, so to speak, thickest of logs. Like people who are, somehow seem to be very spiritually insensitive or disconnected, somehow when the shofar comes, it does something to them. I'm wondering, based on what you're saying, if maybe, well, you mentioned that you have all these lists of things that you're supposed to be thinking about
Right,
when
right.
you're in the chauffeur. I wonder if you're then kind of getting very stuck in the intellectual side of it and not allowing yourself to just feel it on an emotional level.
I mean, this could probably be its own class, I'm sure, but I don't know how to break the log, if that makes sense in this context, because I'm trying to figure out how to make this applicable. It's a great, I love the idea of what to do, but in practice, I'm really struggling of how to actualize a plan like this. And I'm just using this shofar blowing as just an example. I'm sure there's, a billion other ways you can apply it. But how do I listen to something and then split the log at the same time? That's what I'm trying to figure out how to do.
So maybe we want to splinter the log in advance of it, like in preparation for Rosh Hashanah. The difference between the shofar in the month leading up to Rosh Hashanah and on Rosh Hashanah itself. In the month leading up to Rosh Hashanah, it's like that reminder, like Rosh Hashanah is coming, like get your act together. It's time to, figure things out. On Rosh Hashanah itself, the shofar is not so much a call to teshuva, repentance, as much as it's a crowning of the king. Like, all right, God, I showed up.
Right.
Here I am for you. I am accepting you as my God for the upcoming year. And obviously there are all these additional thoughts, but I would say go through the different meditations about the shofar blowing.
Yeah.
Maybe find the one that you resonate the most with, the one that you feel touches you at the deepest level, and focus on that, both in preparation for Rosh Hashanah and then when you get to Rosh Hashanah itself.
Yeah, I think I've learned something new recently, that the order of the blowing, with especially the more broken ones, they're always sort of a sandwich. There's the long one, then a couple of broken ones, and then a long one, and then it'll be a long one, and then a lot of broken ones, and then a long one. So why are we having this sandwich? What's the order? And apparently there's a Gemara that says that the sandwich component, I mean, you're in education, you do this all the time, I'm sure, in terms of complimenting parents and then saying little Johnny has the problem with whatever, and then here's the compliment again. That's essentially what we're supposed to reflect on in terms of our deeds and misdeeds. I'm a good person overall. I'm making attempts. I could probably try to do a little bit better in this department, but overall, man, I'm doing a good thing here. I'm here. I'm present. That type of sandwich meditation, I guess. That's probably as close as I think that I'm going to get to go into. Okay, well, Abraham was told to sacrifice his son, and now at the last second there's a ram. I'm not feeling it. I'm not. It's
Okay.
too much. I don't know. Maybe it's too much.
I do think it's a lot. I remember seeing a child do in school. They'd had this little project where they created a bookmark to put in their prayer
Yeah.
book about all the things to have in mind while listening to the shofar. Um, and I thought it was beautiful of the teacher to do that, to kind of help the child remember all of these things. But at the same time, I feel like you, like if I'm trying to think of all of those things simultaneously while listening to one shofar blowing,
Yeah.
it's a little overwhelming, right? It's hard to spread yourself so thin. So I
Yeah.
would say, again, think of the one that talks to you the most, and I think you can allow yourself to meditate on that, and it will affect you.
Yeah. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Harriet?
Speaking of Rosh Hashanah, and it seems like there's two different things going on, and that one is the splintering, the looking at who we are, and as you say, doing it ourselves rather than having God do it is a much similar process. And at the same time, getting closer to God. But it seems like it's two different, kind of like two different, I mean, I know it's not two different tracks, but it seems like, and I wondered back when we studied the book 3 of Tanya and talked about the lower teshuva and the upper is, I mean, is that part of, like, it's all one process, and to get closer to God, you have to do
So,
the
so
cleanup
what you'll
work?
see, well, I'm going to try to conclude the chapter tonight. You'll see really the theme of this chapter is confronting that evil or confronting the negativity inside of us. How do we confront it? So firstly, we have to sensitize ourselves to it. And then what do we tell it? You know, how do we, and it's really going to talk about the truest, the essence of the negativity, recognizing where it really comes from, and ultimately it results in a feeling of closeness. But I would say hold that thought till the end of the chapter. Let me know if you still have it when we come to the end. The Tanya gives in this chapter a few different meditations that a person can use when trying to have this, conversation with themselves. You don't have to use all of them, choose the one that talks to you in the situation that you are. When, and again, not every day, not on a regular basis, but when you're faced with a situation of like, I feel like I don't care, I feel like I'm not sensitive enough, what are different things that you can tell yourself to open you up with a little more sensitivity? So having a little bit of a tough conversation of, hey, like, life is not as perfect as you think it is, and you're not doing everything as right as you think you are. That's one thing that you might tell yourself. Another thing that Tanya mentions here, which is interesting, says if you can't think of things that maybe you don't do so well, and like you really feel like you got it all together, and I have a hard time imagining that there are many people in this group who experience this, but Tanya says, you can actually take a look at your dreams. And it quotes an interesting teaching from Kabbalah that when Kabbalah teaches us that when a person sleeps, it's 1/60th of death, meaning there's an element of our soul that leaves us when we sleep, not all of our soul, but a part of it that rises upwards, gets cleansed, and then, we say, thank you, God, for returning my soul to me when we wake up in the morning. And Kabbalah teaches us that it kind of depends on how high your soul rises in your sleep. That is what will affect and influence your dreams. So somebody who is on a very lofty level and is doing things very smoothly and is thinking about very holy things throughout the day, then at night, their soul rises pretty high and they probably have some really holy dreams. I don't know. I'm not at that level. I haven't experienced that. For most of us, when we wake up in the morning and we realize that, hey, I just dreamt about cheesecake, or I just dreamt about, whatever, winning the lottery. I don't know, whatever it is that we're dreaming of. Or sometimes people dream about, lowly things and indulgences that maybe aren't even appropriate. When a person reflects on their dreams, they say, if that's what I was dreaming about, then that's really a reflection of what I had been thinking about consciously or subconsciously during the day. And really a little bit of a message to me of where my soul was kind of going while I was sleeping. So unless when I'm analyzing my dreams, I'm noticing that all my dreams were very holy, then probably, again, I'm not as holy and perfect as I think I am, or I tell myself that I am. Again, it's a thought that Tanya gives us to help us have these conversations with ourselves, to recognize that there's room. I can splinter myself a little bit. I can sensitize myself a little more. There's a very fascinating teaching in the Ethics of Our Fathers, Pirkei Avot. This might be familiar to some of you. A very mind-boggling story. Here's what the story that's told. The story is told about Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Shimon. It says he was once walking on the road and he bumps into a man and he tells the man, "My, how ugly you are. Are all the people from your city so ugly?" And the man responds to him and says, "Actually, you shouldn't ask me. Ask the craftsman who created me." And at that point, the rabbi said, "I'm sorry." And he, blessed him before he went on his way. You read this and you're like, okay, what exactly is going on here? I mean, seriously? Is that what a rabbi does? Walks on the street and just tells somebody how awful looking he is? And when you read into the commentaries on this, one of the beautiful commentaries that explains this interaction says that Rabbi Elazar looked at the person. Rabbi Elazar was a very spiritually sensitive person, and he looked at the person and he was able to see that this is a spiritually ugly person. This is somebody whose ego has gotten so big that he's like a thick log. And Rabbi Elazar saw this and said, I need to help this person like splinter just a bit. I kind of need to help him deflate his ego. So we said to him, my, how ugly you are. He meant, what an ugly ego you have. I mean, seriously, are all the people from your town like you? Like, this is what you guys think is normal? And by the person's response, you can see that it was a successful experiment, because his immediate response was, don't ask me, ask the one who created me. Suddenly, he recognized God, and he right away acknowledged God. So the lesson is not for us to go splintering others at all. That's not our job. Maybe when we're at the level of Rabbi Elazar and we have that tremendous spiritual sensitivity, there might be a role that we receive. But for most of us, our job is to take care of ourselves, to look ourselves in the mirror and to be honest with ourselves and see where actually we are. And the Tanya is telling us that if we are truly honest with ourselves and we are able to reach a point of at least some splintering, the fire will catch. The next time we study Torah, the next time we engage Jewishly, we'll feel it. So if you're telling yourself, I don't feel it, I'm going to synagogue Rosh Hashanah, I just don't feel anything, then maybe you have to have a little conversation with yourself. You definitely will feel it, because internally, naturally, you really are sensitive to it. Now, there's another interesting thing that the Tanya says. The Tanya says that, okay, there's two things you can do. You can have this conversation with yourself. Sometimes you just need to yell at your animalistic self. You just need to raise your voice at this animal consciousness of yours and call it out for what it really is. And it gives an interesting example. Latanya says, if you study the story of the Jews in the desert, what happens with the spies? Moses sends spies to Israel. They spy on the land. They come back, and what do they say? They say horrible things, right? It's a terrible land. God can't protect us from this in this land. There are giants. They're going to eat us up. They're saying lots of things. They're not saying we don't think it's a good land. They're actually bringing factual proof of what they think makes this land terrible. There are giants. God can never protect us against these giants. And the fruits are too big and it's not inhabitable. And it's such a horrible place. And then what happens? God gets upset with them. Moses gives them the equivalent of a good yelling. And he says, what you do, God brought you until here. Don't you realize that God's been taking care of us all this time? Don't you think God could take care of us there also? And if you know what, fine. If you don't want to go to this land, don't go to this land. You'll stay in the desert for another 40 years. Your children will go to the land. They'll enjoy the land. Basically, a real pep talk. And what happens literally a minute later? They say, okay, we want to go to the land. Sure, for sure, we love the land. Please, God, bring us to the land. It's like, wait a second. If they actually thought the land was so horrible, Moses didn't explain away any of these horrible things. All he said was, guys, get it together. God is bringing you here. He didn't answer any of their problems. So in reality, how is it that they changed their minds so quickly? If they were afraid to go to the land, they should have still been afraid to go to the land after Moses spoke to them. The Tanya says this is an example of like a pep talk that just shakes you awake. It's not there to give you answers. It's not there to explain things. It's what Moses did to them is what we need to do to ourselves in the mirror and say, come on, get it together. Don't you realize that God's in charge? Don't you realize that the real reality here is spirituality and holiness? And sometimes that raising our voice at the ego or at the animal consciousness or at ourselves in the mirror, however you relate to it best, that alone can kind of shake us into reality. But what is the reality? What are we trying to really remind ourselves and to make ourselves sensitive to? And that is, many of you will remember, we just brought it up for sure numerous times, but the Tanya multiple times quotes, again, a parable from the Zohar. The Zohar tells about a king who wanted to test his son and prepare his son for the kingdom, for leading the kingdom. So the king wants to make sure, he says, my son never really has any life experience. He lives in the palace. Everything's given to him on a silver platter. He never really has tough situations that he has to deal with that make him stronger, because we know that tough experiences make you stronger. So the king says, I need my son to go through a really difficult experience in order to make him a man. What's it going to be? So the king hires a prostitute, the greatest, most talented prostitute in the land. Now, she's a very loyal subject, and she comes before the king, and the king says, ma'am, I have a job for you. And your job is to make my son have an affair with you. All right, so now that's your job. As the king, I command you to do this. Now, it's hard for us a little bit to relate to the king idea, but definitely in the times and in the places where there was a king, you don't disobey the king. The king says something, you do whatever the king says. So now this woman she's stuck between a rock and a hard place. On one hand, her loyalty is to the king. She loves the king. She'll do anything for the king, and naturally for his son. And she wants the kingdom to succeed, and she wants his son to succeed, because God forbid if the king's son falls for this, then he is unfit to lead the country. The whole kingdom comes crumbling down. At the same time, she was just given a job. And the job that she was given to do is not really a job that you can do half-heartedly. Like, if you do it, you have to do it well, and you have to do it right. Otherwise, the prince is a smart guy. He'll see through it if you're not doing it well. So now she goes ahead and she follows the king's instructions, and she works really, really hard at seducing the prince. You tell me, what is this woman's true desire? Does she truly desire to succeed in tripping up the prince? Or does she truly desire not to succeed? Which one? Now, she's working really hard at it. She, in a way, there's a part of her that really wants to succeed because she was given one job. And if she does it well, she did what the king wants of her. So she's going to work really hard to do it. But we all understand that deep down, she is hoping that she fails and that he doesn't listen to her. Because she is doing what she's doing because she was sent as a messenger to do it, not because it's really her truest desire. Now, what happens when okay, well, let's go back to the what's called the nimshal, how it is in our lives. See, in other religions, they believe in, let's say, Satan being the evil, which is a different world than God. There's like the good and the evil, and they're two different worlds, and they're kind of in competition with each other. Who's going to win, like God or Satan? In Judaism, we don't see it that way. In Judaism, there's one God, and all of creation is one. And actually, the word Satan, Satan in Hebrew, comes from the word soteh, deviating. The Satan is actually a holy angel hired by God to make us deviate from the path. Not because God wants us to deviate from the path, but the only way for us to have free choice and to make a real decision to do what God wants is if we actually have a choice. So the Satan, or the evil inclination, or the, whatever you want to call it, the animalistic side of us that's trying really hard to get us to not do what God wants us to do, is like that prostitute. It's working really, really hard to do its job, but it knows very well who hired it, what it was hired for. And deep down, it definitely does not want to succeed in what it's doing. So how do you overcome it? You expose it, right? What happens if this woman comes over to the prince and is trying to, nag him and talk to him and get his attention? What happens if the prince looks at her and says, "Hey, hello, I know who you really are. You know my dad hired you to do this. You're not going to fool me. Like this is useless. I know exactly who you are." He just blew her cover. There's no way she can succeed at that point, right? If he does that, she basically just has to pack her bags and go because she realizes her job is over. The Tanya says that's what we need to do. When we talk to our ego, when we talk to our animalistic inclinations, when we look at ourselves and look at these things that are pulling us away from what we're supposed to do, we're supposed to just blow its cover. We're supposed to say, "Hey, you animal soul, I know who you are. I know that you're really part of God. God put you inside me just to make me, deviate from the path, just to make me prove my loyalty. But I'm not going to listen to you. I'm not going to go down that path. I know what God really wants of me. I am going to go ahead and do the right thing." But again, by having that conversation with ourselves, and recognizing that all of this glitz and glamour that we're seeing that seems unholy is really just that angel that God sent to kind of not allow us to see the truth, that itself opens our eyes and allows us to make better decisions. So next time I'm trying to decide, Rosh Hashanah or, I don't know, the football game, Rosh Hashanah or like I'm trying to decide and I feel like it's two different things. If I remind myself, hey, it's not two different things. One is really just trying to cover the other one because its job is to cover the other one. But hey, I'm going to blow your cover. I know that this game or meeting or appointment that just came up on my calendar when I'm really supposed to go to a Tanya class or I'm really supposed to go and, help somebody and visit someone who's sick or whatever it is. I know this is really just that force that God is sending to try to challenge me. So just by recognizing it and saying it out loud, that gives me the strength to overcome it. And that's where the Tanya brings the example of light and darkness. If I have a room that's a dark room and I want to get rid of the darkness, I mean, I could sit and try to push the darkness out with all of my might, and I will not be successful. If I just light one candle, I don't have to even deal with the darkness. It will naturally disappear because darkness is just the absence of light. Similarly, that evil inclination inside of us is just the cover of trying to cover up my true desires and my most natural desires. And as soon as I recognize it, it's like I flicked on the light switch. It's like, oh, yeah, that's what it was all about. And it suddenly makes those decisions so much easier. And with that, really, that brings us to the end of this chapter. Mainly what this chapter spoke about, if we had to summarize chapter 29 between last class and this class, it's number one, mainly talking about how to deal with spiritual insensitivity. What happens when I can't get myself to care, right? And I can't get myself to, to get inspired. So splinter the wood, have a little pep talk with myself, confront myself, recognize what the real reality is. And then beyond that, what we added today is recognize that the truest reality is that, like that person who was complaining to the rabbi that I'm struggling with my faith. Recognize that the true you is the one that really wants to believe and wants to be inspired and wants to be connected. And anything that you're feeling different than that, and anything that you're feeling, covering up on those desires of connection is really just external. Like as soon as you peel away the layers, as soon as you blow the cover, you will be able to get in touch with your truest self, and you'll definitely feel the inspiration. There's no way as a Jewish person that you cannot get inspired, whether it's Rosh Hashanah, whether it's hearing the shofar, whether it's from the prayers, whether it's from studying Tanya. If you're finding yourself unable to get inspired, you have to talk to yourself. Thoughts or questions? Wow, we have a quiet crowd tonight. Okay, let me go on to another story. This is a very famous story, but always worth repeating before Rosh Hashanah. So, like Sarah said before, when we listen to the shofar, and as we mentioned the other day, the main mitzvah of Rosh Hashanah is the shofar. So hopefully you can dedicate your full 48 hours to Rosh Hashanah. But in the event that you can't do all of Rosh Hashanah in its entirety, at least make sure that you're hearing the shofar both on Tuesday and on Wednesday. And when we listen to the shofar, so we also mentioned that the shofar is God's bringing a new energy into the world. He's drawing down all our blessings for us for the new year into the world. And a lot of that is drawn through the blowing of the shofar. There's something very powerful about the sound of the shofar. So there's a lot of meditations that we're taught to think about during the shofar blowing, and please don't think about them all at once, or like Sarah and me, you'll just, get a little dizzy. But yeah, the different things that are brought down about the calling of the shofar is, it's reminding us about where we come from. It reminds us that we're children of Abraham because of the story of the ram with the binding of Isaac. It reminds us about the fact that it's Rosh Hashanah and we're crowning God as our king. And you can have the imagery of, the coronation of a king and how special that is, and how we are now gathering as Jewish people all over the world. There are Jews standing, right now, blowing the shofar, all of us declaring God is our king. And that's a very powerful thing to think about. Remembering also the shofar reminds us of the future redemption. It says that in future redemption, God will blow a great shofar. So reminding us that better days are coming. We might be struggling. There are awful things happening, but there is a brighter future. There is a better tomorrow. And the shofar reminds us of that hope and that prayer that we have. And then my favorite one, or the one, if I could say, that resonates with me most closely, is a story that I like to tell every year about also a king. We like to tell a lot of stories of kings in Judaism because that's how we, if we try to understand our relationship with God. A king that had an only child, and he knew his son was destined to be king one day, but he didn't want him to be king without real world, real life experiences. And so he decided he's going to exile his son from the palace. You can't just be a prince and then, know how to relate to people. So he packed him a backpack and he said, you are now going to go travel the world without bodyguards, without any of the comforts of home, and just go travel the world, get to know the people, get to know the land, and it'll make you a better king someday. And of course, the son goes and he travels to different countries and he gets lost, and there's no phones and there's no GPS. And right, he's going from one city to the next, from one country to the next. And many years pass. And this prince, over time, kind of forgets his identity. He definitely loses touch with it on a regular basis. He forgets his mother tongue. He forgets the language that they spoke in the palace and the type of wording that they would use. He forgot how they would dress, and he forgot how they would behave. And after so many years of basically living in the streets, roaming the towns, roaming the cities, he became a real simpleton. And eventually, after many, many years of travel, he finally makes his way back to the palace. He kind of remembered, this is really my home and this is where I want to get back to. And he comes to the palace, and of course, the way he's dressed and the way he looks, the guards don't recognize him. And he tries to speak to them, and he doesn't know the language. He doesn't know the way they speak. He's definitely not talking like a prince. And so they don't believe him, who he is, and they don't want to let him in. So the gates are closed and the door's closed, and this prince is standing outside, and he really wants to get into the palace, and he's trying to communicate, and he really doesn't know how to communicate. And finally, he becomes so dejected, he just sits down on the side of the palace and he just starts crying. And he starts crying and crying really loudly and wailing. And his cries reach the ears of his father, who's, sitting up in the palace. And of course, cries are beyond any language. They're beyond any language. They're beyond any accent. They're beyond a cry is a cry. And his father recognizes this pure cry of his child. And he says, I know that's my child. Go and get him. Go and bring him in. And the guards come down and they bring the child in, and he's reunited with his family. and he's able to be restored to his former lifestyle. And this is given as an example for us. We come to Rosh Hashanah, and we are the children. We say on Rosh Hashanah, we say Avinu Malkeinu, God is our king and God is our father. Aside from being subjects of a king, we also have this very special relationship that we are God's children, and God loves us like a parent loves their child, and we love God deeply like a child who loves their parents. We may be rebellious. We may not always do what he wants us to do. We may have strayed around the world a million times, but Rosh Hashanah comes and we know where our home is and we know where we want to be. And maybe we don't know the language, and maybe we've forgotten the mannerisms, and maybe we're not doing everything right, and maybe I didn't say all the prayers correctly, and maybe I didn't even make it to shul. But when I listen to the sound of the shofar is the cry of the soul. And we know that the sounds of the shofar, they resemble cries, right? Think of when you listen to a child crying, it's never this one long cry. It's wah, and then, wah, 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 and then it's like crying is never very straight. And when we listen to the shofar, we recognize that this is our soul crying out and saying, Father, just take me home. Take us home. Give us a good year. Just anything that I've done, I know that you've forgiven me for everything. Let me start fresh. Let me start this new year. Personally, for me, that's the one that resonates the most. When I listen to the sound of the shofar, I literally I just think, I look at everyone standing around, and I'm thinking like, gosh, look at all of us standing here, and our souls are crying, and we all know where we want to be and where we want to get to. And it definitely is a very powerful experience. So if that resonates with you, I'm happy to share it. If one of the other thoughts is more inspiring to you, there's no right or wrong, but you definitely you want to try to hear the shofar, that's for sure. Yes, Harriet.
As you're talking, it occurs to me how encased my ego is, but particularly for a long time, that I was so busy doing whatever that it took several hard knocks, like a brain injury, like peritonitis and sepsis, to break through to get me to the point of being able to connect on a more spiritual level. And I'm just like, wow, man, talk about hard-headed and talk about knocked on the side of the head. It just
well, no more knocks this year, Harriet. The year should be sweet and beautiful. You are as sensitive can come. You don't need any more knocks coming. If we want to just back to where we started from, talking about sensitivity, I find that if you really focus on one of these meditations of shofar, it's one of the greatest ways to awaken that sensitivity. I find it very hard to be insensitive to listening to the shofar. And again, not judging if somebody has a hard time becoming sensitive to the shofar, but try to find the meditation that resonates with you, and let it take over you. Let it pierce you. Try to feel that this is me crying out, or this is me crowning God, and I'm accepting you, God, and I am, committing to having a good year. And God willing, this should be the last Rosh Hashanah that we have to do this, still hoping about the future redemption. And we should very soon have the actual ultimate redemption. And the year that's upcoming should be a year of real sweetness and goodness and revealed goodness and all the blessings in the world to everyone here and our extended families. And of course, the entire Jewish nation, and specifically the hostages who we think about daily. They should, before Rosh Hashanah, but they should not have to experience another Rosh Hashanah in hell, if I can say that. For those
amen.
who missed the announcement, if you don't currently have plans, for Rosh Hashanah, we are doing shofar blowing at our house formally on Tuesday night at 6 p.m. But honestly, anytime you show up on Rosh Hashanah, we will be happy to blow shofar for you if you have not heard the shofar. We're also hosting Rosh Hashanah dinner on Monday night. So if you don't have other plans for Rosh Hashanah dinner, please consider yourself invited and let me know that you'll be joining us. And there will be also Rosh Hashanah services run by Chabad of Richardson at the Methodist Richardson Medical Center that is, again, open to everyone so that everyone has a chance to experience Rosh Hashanah. And I can't believe next time we see you guys, we'll say Happy New Year, or today we get to say see you next year, right? That was like the funnest thing to do in elementary school. See you next year. As Jews, we get to do that twice a year. We get to do that once in September and then once again in December. Any thoughts, questions, ideas to share? So either it was just so clear and inspiring, or it was just so confusing that it's not even worth discussing. One or the other. All right, Shana Tova, everybody. Have a good night. Have a wonderful holiday, and we'll see you next week.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.